In the quiet corners of the Irish countryside, there is a peace that feels ancient. It settles in the low-lying fog, clings to the damp stones of a farmer's wall, and muffles the world in a blanket of deep, still green. Inside a cottage, the scent of peat smoke fills the air, a smell of warmth, of safety, of 1,000 years of quiet nights spent by the hearth. But then, a sound begins. It is not a sound of this world. It carries on the wind a thin, ethereal note that cuts through the calm. It is not a scream of violence, but a lament of such profound, bottomless sorrow that the birds fall silent and the fire seems to shrink from its cold touch. Deep within the cottage, heads lift from their work. Faces turn to the window, their eyes filled not with terror, but with a kind of solemn, dreadful recognition. They do not need to ask what it is. They know. But the source of this sound is not a ghoul hiding in the shadows. She is a spirit bound by honor and by blood, a guardian who appears as a maiden, a matron, or a crone, with eyes made red from a grief that is not her own. This is the Banshee, the woman of the other world, a figure whose sacred duty has been twisted into a terrifying legend. When she appears, she offers no threat, no malice, only a sorrowful warning that a great soul is about to pass from the world. This presents a haunting puzzle. How does a figure of such dignity, a sacred herald of death, become the mindless, shrieking monster that haunts our nightmares? Before we continue this story, I want to ask you something. If you believe these dark myths, strange histories, and forgotten legends are worth remembering, if you believe the mysteries of our past should not be lost, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing. Your support keeps the candle lit and allows us to keep exploring the shadows. Tonight, we will open the file on the Banshee. We will trace her origins back to the ancient goddesses of Ireland. From the battlefields where she cried for dying heroes, to the great halls of the Gaelic clans she was sworn to protect. From the chilling eyewitness accounts written in noble diaries, to the modern horror films that stole her voice and turned her into a monster. This is not only the story of a spirit, it is the story of a nation's grief, our relationship with death, the echo of our own sorrow. To understand that echo, we must first silence the noise of the modern monster. Before she was a caricature, she was a goddess, a guardian, and a powerful symbol of a family's unbreakable bond with the past. And to solve the riddle of what she became, we must first travel back in time to hear the true, sorrowful song she sings. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. What if I told you the most famous thing about the Banshee, her terrifying, blood-curdling scream, is a complete and total lie? It's a modern fiction, a jump scare in ghost form, invented by storytellers who needed a simple monster, not a complex spirit. The shriek you hear in movies is a cheap trick, a sound designed to make you jump in your seat. But the authentic sound, the one that made the blood of ancient Irish families run cold, was something far more intimate and unsettling. It wasn't a scream, it was a song. In Old Ireland, there was a sacred tradition known as keening. Imagine women whose entire job was to mourn, to sing the dead to sleep. They were professionals, hired to perform a heartbreaking, poetic lament that wove the family's history and sorrow into a final, beautiful lullaby for the soul. It was a performance, an art form meant to guide the spirit, into the next world. That is the sound of the Banshee. She is not a mindless monster who shrieks. She is a supernatural artist who keens. Her cry isn't an attack, it's a ritual, a sacred duty she has been sent from the otherworld to perform for a family of royal blood. She is the ultimate mourner, the final, devastating encore at the end of a life. But correcting the sound only raises a more chilling question. If you were to hear that authentic, sorrowful song outside your window in the dead of night, and you were brave enough or foolish enough to look, what would you actually see? The answer is more terrifying than any simple ghost, because the Banshee doesn't have one face, she has three. 3 faces. A terrifying thought, isn't it? Imagine it. You're frozen in place, listening to that mournful song fade into the night. The logical part of your brain is screaming at you to stay put, to hide, to pretend you heard nothing. But the older, more curious part of you, the part that needs to know, draws you to the window. What you see out there in the mist isn't random. It's a prophecy. The Banshee's form is a living tarot card, and its meaning is always the same. It tells you how the story is about to end. You might see a stunningly beautiful young woman, the Maiden, whose ethereal grace is a tragic reflection of the young soul about to be lost. Or perhaps you'll see the Matron, a figure of stern, queenly dignity in a grey travelling cloak. Her presence an omen that a great pillar of the family is about to fall. And then there is the form that has fueled 1,000 nightmares, the crone. A tiny, withered figure with a face carved by grief. She is terrifying, but she is not an attacker. She is a mirror, her ancient form a final, solemn tribute to a long life reaching its end. She might even leave something behind. The old stories are filled with chilling warnings about finding a silver comb left on a stone wall after she has gone. It is a piece of the otherworld, an artifact of immense power. You must never, ever touch it. It belongs to her, and she is famously possessive. Steal from her, and her sorrow will curdle into a relentless, terrifying rage that will haunt you to your grave. Her eyes, which witnesses swear are as red as blood, are not burning with demonic hate, but are stained by an eternity of weeping for the families she must serve. Maiden, matron, or crone, a cursed comb and eyes that weep forever. These details paint the picture of a powerful, dangerous, and deeply emotional spirit. But they all pale in comparison to the single greatest secret of her identity, a secret that has been hiding in plain sight for centuries, right in her name, Banshee. Bean is simple enough. It's the Gaelic word for woman. But Sídhe, that is the key that unlocks everything. It does not mean fairy in the way we think of them. The Sídhe are the great, ancient, hollow hills of Ireland which were believed to be gateways to the otherworld. And the beings who lived there were the descendants of gods. The legendary Tuatha Dé Danann, a magical race of such power they didn't die out. They simply retired from our world and moved into their own. The Banshee is one of them. She is not a ghost. She is a goddess on a mission, a member of a supernatural nobility, an immortal aristocrat from a parallel dimension. Her duty is to announce the deaths of the few mortal families whose bloodline is still ancient and pure enough to matter to the gods of old. And that revelation should be the end of the story. A powerful, godlike being performs her ancient duty. Simple, clean. But folklore is rarely so tidy. The stories whisper of another, darker path to becoming a banshee. Because what if not all of them are born of magic and myth from the other world? What if some of them are made? What kind of unspeakable tragedy, what kind of terrible injustice does it take to bind a mortal woman's soul to this eternal, sorrowful duty? The answer is more human and far more heartbreaking than you can imagine. So, how does it happen? How is a mortal woman forged into an eternal, sorrowful spirit? The oldest stories say there are two paths a soul can take to that fate. One paved with brutal injustice, the other with a love so fierce it defies the grave itself. The first path begins with a betrayal. Picture a young woman from a great family, centuries ago. Her life stolen away. A poisoned cup from a rival clan. A dagger in the dark from a jealous suitor. Her death is an ugly, unfinished story. And so her spirit, fueled by a rage and love that death cannot extinguish, refuses to move on. It becomes a spectral guardian, her eternal cry, a warning forged from her own tragedy, a promise that no one in her bloodline will ever again be caught so unaware by death's cruelty. She is the scar on the family soul, a ghost born of violence who now stands watch for all time. The second path is quieter, but no less profound. It begins not with a murder, but with a duty. Think again of the keening women, the professional mourners whose entire lives were dedicated to the art of grief. These women were respected, but they were also feared. They lived on the edges of society, seen as having one foot in our world and one in the next. The most powerful of them were said to develop a true connection to the other world. What happens when a woman like that, whose very soul is intertwined with a family's history of loss, finally passes away herself? The stories say that her spirit simply refuses to abandon its post. Her love and her duty are so profound that she continues her work from beyond the veil. She becomes the clan's personal, spectral mourner, her song the ultimate and most heartbreaking testament to a lifetime of loyalty. So which is it? Is the spirit crying outside your window a fallen goddess from a magical dimension? Or the tragic ghost of one of your own ancestors? The chilling truth is, it could be both. Folklore is a messy, overlapping thing, and after centuries of stories being told and retold around the fire, the lines have blurred. The godlike being and the human ghost have become one and the same. This fusion of the divine and the tragic is what gives the Banshee her true power. She is not just a monster or a messenger. She is a complex, heartbreaking echo of Ireland's own history. A history filled with fallen nobility, unspeakable tragedy, and a loyalty that is stronger, quite literally, than death itself. The ghost of a murdered woman, the eternal spirit of a loyal servant. These stories are powerful, personal, and heartbreaking, but they are only half the truth. Because the otherworldly power a Banshee wields, the ancient magic she commands, and the authority with which she passes judgment on the souls of men, that didn't come from a human tragedy. To find the source of that power, we have to dig deeper. Past the graves of mortals, past the first kings of Ireland, and into the smoking crater of myth itself. Long before the first humans set foot on the island, Ireland was ruled by a different kind of nobility. a race of beings so powerful, their story begins not with a birth, but with an invasion from the sky. They were the Tuatha Dé Danann, and they arrived on dark clouds, landing on the mountains and blotting out the sun for 3 days and 3 nights. They were masters of art, poetry, and a deep primal magic that was woven into the fabric of the land itself. They brought with them 4 legendary treasures: a sword that no enemy could escape, a spear that never missed its mark, a cauldron that could feed any army without ever running empty, and the Stone of Destiny, a great rock that would cry out in triumph when the true High King of Ireland stood upon it. They were, for all intents and purposes, the gods of ancient Ireland, but their time in the sun was not meant to last. A new race arrived, the mortal Milesians, the ancestors of the modern Irish. And after a great magical war, a deal was struck. The Tuatha Dé Danann, realizing the world was growing too mundane for their kind of magic, agreed to a great retreat. They divided Ireland in 2. The mortals were given the surface, the world of fields and sunlight. The Tuatha Dé Danann took the world within the land, a parallel dimension known as the Otherworld, with the ancient burial mounds, the Sídhe, as their hidden capitals and secret gateways. They became the Aos, the people of the mounds, the first family, the hidden aristocracy of Ireland. The Banshee is one of them. She is a living remnant of this divine race, one of the few who still crosses the veil between their world and ours. Her power isn't just ghostly, it's godlike. But that raises a chilling question. If she's a member of this magical, all-powerful family, why is her job so grim? Why would a goddess spend her eternal life as a herald of death? The answer lies with 2 of the most powerful and terrifying women in the entire divine family, her ancient, formidable sisters. To understand the Banshee, you have to understand her family. And in the divine family of the Tuatha Dé Danann, there were 2 formidable sisters who, together, defined the voice of death in Ireland. First, there was the Phantom Queen, the goddess of the battle cry, the Morrigan. In her most terrifying form, she was known as Badb. Imagine a brutal, chaotic battle from Irish myth, the clang of sword on shield, the screams of dying heroes, and then, soaring above it all, a great black crow. That was Badby. Her shriek was a weapon, a prophecy of doom that could shatter the courage of an army and curdle the blood in a warrior's veins. She didn't just predict the slaughter, she reveled in it. She was the personification of the brutal, violent, and terrifying side of death. This is where the Banshee gets her terror. The shriek that can stop your heart, the chilling prophecy of a violent end, the face of a crone contorted in something that looks like rage. That is the ghost of Badb, the Phantom Queen, still crying out over the battlefields of life and death. But that's only one side of the family. The shriek of battle has a sister, the song of the funeral. Meet Bridget, the beloved goddess of poets, healers, and craftsmen. Where Badb was darkness and chaos, Bridget was light and creation. But her story is marked by a profound tragedy. When her son was killed in a battle, the myths say her grief was so immense, so all-consuming, that she threw herself over his body and invented a new sound. It was the very first lament ever heard in Ireland, a beautiful, heartbreaking song of pure sorrow. She literally invented the art of keening. This is where the Banshee gets her sorrow, the profound, heartbreaking lament that sounds like a mother weeping for her child, the form of the beautiful maiden mourning a life cut short, the eyes red from an eternity of tears. That is the echo of Bridget, the grieving mother, still singing the first, saddest song. Do you see it now? The Banshee is not one or the other. She is a perfect, chilling fusion of both. She inherited her terrifying, prophetic shriek from the goddess of war, and her deep, compassionate lament from the goddess of grief. She has the voice of a battlefield and the heart of a funeral. So we have our divine blueprint, a goddess of war and a goddess of grief fused into one supernatural being. And that should be enough. She should be worshipped, feared, and revered as one of the great powers of the land. But she isn't. Why? Because a new power arrived in Ireland. A power with a single, jealous god, and a story that had no room for the old pantheon. A power that began a quiet, centuries-long campaign to erase them from memory. But as they would soon find out, you can't just kill a god. You can only demote them. That new power, of course, was Christianity. It arrived in Ireland not with a sword, but with a story. And it was a story with a single, jealous god that had no room for a sprawling, chaotic, and often terrifying family of ancient deities. The world was being rewritten, and the Tuatha Dé Danann were being edited out of the main story in a kind of cosmic, hostile takeover. But there was a problem. You can't just erase gods. You can't simply tell people to stop believing in the powers they have worshipped for thousands of years, powers they believed were alive in the rivers, the mountains, and the soil beneath their feet. The belief was too deep, too primal. So, the new power did something clever. It didn't fire the old gods. It gave them a corporate restructuring. It demoted them. They were allowed to stay on, but with their grand titles stripped and their responsibilities drastically reduced. Take the Morrigan. Her divine portfolio was immense. She was the goddess of war, of fate, of prophecy, of the very sovereignty of the land itself. After the demotion, that grand resume was shredded. Her dominion over kingdoms and her power to decide the fate of armies were stripped away, until only one grim task remained on her job description: announcing death. The great all-powerful goddess of what became the sorrowful herald of what was to come. The queen became a messenger, and so, across Ireland, the gods began to fade. They retreated from the world of grand temples and public worship and slipped into the world of whispered folklore. They became the fairies, the good neighbors, the hidden folk. It was a great fading, a quiet, centuries-long twilight for the old world. But here's the thing about loyalty, especially the loyalty of a god. It's stubborn. The new world might have forgotten them, but the gods never forgot the bloodlines of the high kings and great heroes who had worshipped them for centuries. So what happens when a fallen goddess is bound by an ancient, sacred promise to a family whose own glory is fading into the mists of time? She doesn't abandon them. She becomes their eternal, spectral guardian, and her cry becomes the last, defiant echo of a forgotten kingdom. Her cry is the echo of a forgotten kingdom, and that is not a metaphor. When the old gods faded into myth, their loyalty didn't just vanish. It became concentrated, focused, and fiercely personal. It attached itself not to the land, not to the castles, but to the very blood of the families they had once favored. This is why not just anyone gets a Banshee. There is no application process. You can't earn her favor or buy her loyalty. It is a matter of inheritance, a supernatural birthright. And the guest list for this exclusive, terrifying club was closed 1,000 years ago. To have a Banshee cry for you is the ultimate, chilling proof that you are descended from Irish royalty. There is a secret code hidden in the family names themselves. The ancient rule of thumb is that the Banshee cries only for the bloodlines whose names begin with an O or a Mac. And this isn't a coincidence. These prefixes are a genealogical map back to the age of heroes. O means grandson of or descendant of. Mac means son of. The O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the McCarthys. These aren't just names. They are declarations of lineage, a direct link to the legendary founders of the great Irish clans. These were the families who ruled Ireland, who fought alongside the gods, and whose loyalty never wavered, and the gods, in turn, made a promise. So you see, the Banshee is not a random spirit who haunts a place. She is the ancestral guardian of a people. Her appearance is not a curse. It is a terrifying honor. It is a statement from the other world that your family's name is still remembered, that your blood is still recognized as royal, and that one of their own is being summoned home. This divine loyalty, this unbreakable bond between a goddess and a bloodline seems straightforward enough, until someone new shows up and tries to change the locks on the castle door. So, the Banshee's loyalty is to the bloodline, an unbreakable divine contract. And this ancient loyalty had a very real and very political consequence in the human world. It turned the Banshee from a simple death omen into a powerful, supernatural symbol of defiance. To understand this, you have to picture Ireland in the 16th and 17th centuries. Imagine you are a new English lord, granted a vast, confiscated estate by the crown. You arrive at a magnificent, ancient Irish castle. It's now yours. You have the papers, the title, the wealth, and the soldiers to prove it. You are the new master in the eyes of the law. But every night, as you walk the stone halls, you feel it. You are a stranger here, a pretender, because the local Irish tenants who now work your land know a secret you don't. They know that the ancient spirit tied to this castle will never, ever cry for you. Why? Because you don't have the blood. Her silence becomes a constant, ghostly reminder of your illegitimacy. It's a judgment from the otherworld itself, a nightly proclamation that you are a foreigner occupying a throne that isn't yours. This turned the Banshee into a profound symbol of rebellion for the dispossessed Irish nobility. It was a point of pride, supernatural proof that their blood was still royal, that their claim to the land was still recognized by the gods, even if the mortal world had turned against them. It was a way of saying, with otherworldly authority, "You can take my castle, you can take my title, but you can never, ever take my Banshee." These stories of loyalty aren't just vague legends. They are specific, tied to real families, real places, and in some cases, a real name. And none are more famous than the case of the Great O'Brien clan, the direct descendants of one of Ireland's most legendary High Kings, Brian Boru. Their guardian wasn't just a banshee. She was Sorrowful, the beautiful and powerful fairy queen of their ancestral province of Munster. She wasn't some minor spirit. She was royalty, and she was their protector. The most famous story comes from the eve of the legendary Battle of Clontarf in 1014, a battle that would decide the fate of Ireland. The night before the fighting, King Brian Boru's men saw Sorrowful down by the river, but she wasn't crying. She was washing the bloody armor and clothes of the soldiers who were fated to die the next day. Her silent work, a far more terrifying prophecy than any scream. This wasn't a one-time appearance. For the next 600 years, the stories continued. Witnesses at the O'Brien's ancestral home would report hearing the unmistakable, sorrowful cry of Sorrowful drifting from a nearby rocky outcrop named the Rock of the Tryst. Her wail was a constant, named presence in the family's long and bloody history, a grim and abiding reminder of their ancient pact. We have seen the Banshee as a guardian of kings and a symbol of national pride, her cry an echo of a time when gods and heroes walked the earth. But what happens when the great castles fall to ruin? When the noble bloodlines are scattered by famine and poverty across the world? Does the Banshee's ancient cry finally fall silent? Or does it simply follow the family, becoming a quieter, more personal, and perhaps even more terrifying whisper in the modern world? The answer is, she follows. The Banshee is loyal to the blood, not to the crumbling stone walls of a castle. And as the great Irish families began to fall from power and their fortunes scattered, her cry didn't vanish. It simply became more personal. The stories were no longer just about kings and ancient battles. They became diary entries. They became chilling, first-hand accounts written by people who swore they had seen the impossible. And our first case file comes from the most credible witness we could ask for, a skeptical outsider. Her name was Lady Anne Fanshawe. She was an English noblewoman born in 1625, a devout royalist and the wife of a diplomat. She was a rational, well-travelled woman of the world, not some local peasant raised on superstition. In the mid-1600s, while visiting friends in Ireland, she stayed at an ancient, imposing castle. As a guest, she was given the best room, a grand chamber with a window that looked out over a lonely, windswept valley. She retired for the night, the unfamiliar sounds of the old castle settling around her, the groan of timbers, the howl of the wind through the battlements. She fell asleep, but was violently awoken sometime in the dead of night. In her own words, she felt a dreadful scream. The room was unnaturally cold. Drawn by some unseen force, she rose and went to the window, which was now mysteriously open. And there, in the moonlight, she saw it. Leaning into the room, so close she could have touched it, was the figure of a woman. She was, as Lady Fanshawe wrote, a handsome, pale woman with red hair and a pale and ghastly complexion. The spirit was dressed in white. It fixed its gaze upon her, and let out 2 more of those terrible shrieks. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure drifted away down the valley and vanished. Terrified, Anne spent the rest of the night in a state of shock. The next morning, she went to her host, the lady of the castle, and recounted the horrifying experience. She expected concern, perhaps disbelief, maybe even a call for a priest. She did not expect the calm, almost bored look she received. Her host simply sighed and explained the situation as if she were talking about the weather. The figure, she said, was the ghost of a former resident of the castle, a woman who had been wronged by one of the family's ancestors and whose child had been born in that very room. As a result, her spirit was now bound to the family, its appearance a certain omen of death for one of their own. Then came the chilling, final confirmation. The host looked at Lady Fanshawe and said, with a quiet finality, that a cousin of the family, who had been ill in another part of the castle, had indeed died during the night. Lady Anne Fanshawe's account is a cornerstone of this investigation. It is one of the earliest and best documented eyewitness reports we have. It was recorded by a high-status, sober-minded outsider who had nothing to gain from inventing such a tale. It is a chilling piece of testimony that takes the Banshee out of the realm of vague folklore and places her firmly and terrifyingly into the world of recorded human experience. Lady Fanshawe's chilling account was a private memoir, a story locked away in a family diary for years. But by the 1800s, a new kind of investigator emerged across Ireland. They were folklorists, scholars, and writers who realized these stories were a vital part of the nation's fading cultural history, and they raced to write them down before they were lost forever. They became the first paranormal collectors, their books filled with the sworn testimony of credible witnesses. One of the most famous of these investigators was a man named Thomas Crofton Croker. He wasn't just collecting fairy tales. He was taking formal statements, interviewing families, and preserving a history that, until then, had only been spoken around the fire. His books are a treasure trove of Banshee encounters, but one case stands out: the story of the Bunworth Banshee. The Reverend Charles Bunworth was a respected and beloved man, known for his kindness. As he lay on his deathbed, his family and friends gathered for a vigil. The house was silent, filled with a heavy, somber air. Suddenly, from outside, a sound began. It was not a scream. Croker's witnesses described it as a low, sweet, and mournful song that drifted through the night air and filled the house. Multiple people, both inside the home and local peasants walking in the nearby fields, heard the same beautiful, unearthly music. As the Reverend finally passed away, the music swelled one last time and then faded into silence, its duty done. These folklorists weren't just preserving stories, they were building a body of evidence. Another key investigator was Lady Jane Wilde, a renowned poet and the mother of the famous Oscar Wilde. She was an Irish nationalist and a fierce believer in the country's supernatural heritage. She collected dozens of stories, treating them not as fables, but as genuine historical events. In her work, the Banshee is not a monster to be feared, but an ancient and integral part of the Irish soul. Thanks to the work of these collectors, the story of the Banshee was saved. They took personal, fleeting experiences and turned them into a permanent written record, proving that the encounter in that castle was not an isolated incident. The files were growing, the pattern was becoming clearer, and the witness list was getting longer. The work of the folklorists was a snapshot in time, a photograph of the legend as it existed in 19th century Ireland. They were, in a way, documenting the final chapter of an ancient story on its home soil. Because soon after they put down their pens, a cataclysm would strike Ireland that would change it forever. And Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger. It was an apocalypse. A nation was hollowed out by famine and disease. And in the wake of that horror came the Great Scattering. Millions of Irish were forced from their homes, packed into what became known as coffin ships, and scattered to the winds, to the Americas, to Australia, to Canada, to England. This raised a new, heartbreaking question. What happens to the spirits of a land when its people are forced to leave? What happens to an ancestral guardian when the ancestral home is a ruin and the family is an ocean away? The answer came in the form of quiet, chilling stories, whispered not in misty glens, but in the crowded tenement buildings of Boston and the coal-dusted towns of Pennsylvania. Picture it, a row house in a mining town in the 1920s. A family named McCarthy. The air smells of coal smoke and damp earth. Inside, the matriarch, the grandmother who was born in County Cork and still speaks with the accent of the old country, is dying peacefully in her bed. The family is gathered. The mood is somber. The priest has already been. Her grandson, a young boy, is sent outside to get away from the oppressive grief of the house. He plays in the street as the gas lamps flicker on, casting long, dancing shadows. And then he hears it. Over the distant rumble of the coal yards, he hears a song, a low, mournful, and utterly beautiful lament that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It's not frightening, it's just sad. The boy looks up and sees a woman standing at the far end of the street, under a gas lamp. She is tall and slender, wrapped in a simple grey cloak, her face pale and her hair like silver in the dim light. She isn't looking at him. She is just watching the house, his house. She stands there for a long, silent moment, and then, without a sound, she turns and simply vanishes into the shadows between the buildings. The boy doesn't scream. He is more confused than scared. He runs inside to tell his mother about the strange singing lady he saw. But when he explains, his mother and father don't panic. They don't look for a monster. They simply look at each other with a deep, knowing sadness. And then, from the room upstairs, comes the sound of weeping. The grandmother is gone. Later that night, his father explains that what he saw was the Bean Shawente, the keening woman. She had crossed an entire ocean, following the family's bloodline, to perform her final duty and call their grandmother home. This is the ultimate proof of the Banshee's nature. She is not a spirit of place. She is a spirit of people. Her loyalty is not to the soil of Ireland, but to the soul of the Irish. And that soul now lives all over the world. These personal, heartfelt stories, passed down through generations from noble women to immigrants, seem to be undeniable proof. The case feels closed. But what if we've been looking in the wrong place all along? What if the real answer to the Banshee mystery isn't found in the supernatural otherworld, but in the very real traditions and even the surprising wildlife of the Irish countryside? Every good investigation, no matter how strange the subject, must eventually turn a cold, skeptical eye upon itself. Before we can accept a ghost from the otherworld, we must first rule out the humans walking our own. And in the strange case of the Banshee, we have a very human and very fascinating prime suspect, the professional keening woman. To understand how this case of mistaken identity could happen, you have to put yourself in the past. Imagine you are traveling a lonely road in the 18th century Ireland as the twilight fades to black. Ahead, you see a figure moving through the misty fields, pointedly avoiding the main path. It's a woman, her hair unbound and blowing wildly in the wind, her clothes disheveled. And as she moves, she is wailing a low, mournful, and deeply unsettling song. She is an outsider, a specialist in the art of grief, on her way to a funeral. In her time, she is both respected and feared, a woman seen as a living link between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Now ask yourself honestly, is it any wonder that a glimpse of such a figure could be mistaken for a spirit? She perfectly matches the description: the sorrowful woman, the untamed appearance, the otherworldly cry, and always, always found in the orbit of a house in mourning. The keening woman wasn't just a parallel to the legend. For centuries, she may have been an unwitting star in its performance. It's a compelling theory. It's rational. It explains how a sober, God-fearing person could genuinely believe they had seen a spirit, when in fact, they had only seen a woman on her way to work. It neatly explains the sightings of a sorrowful figure and the beautiful, melodic laments. But it has one major hole, a hole that all the logic in the world can't quite fill. What about the shriek? A keening woman is a compelling suspect for the sightings of a sorrowful figure and for the beautiful, melodic laments. It's a rational, elegant theory, but it has one major hole, a hole that all the logic in the world can't quite fill. What about the shriek, the blood-curdling inhuman cry that even sober-minded folklorists recorded in their notes? For this, our investigation must turn away from human tradition and look to the silent hunters of the sky. Our next suspect is a creature that was once a common sight across the Irish countryside. A nocturnal phantom with a ghostly white, heart-shaped face that floats through the darkness without a sound. A predator that has been associated with omens and the supernatural for thousands of years. And it does not hoot. It is the barn owl. For centuries, witnesses have struggled to describe the Banshee's shriek, calling it otherworldly, terrifying, a sound that rips through your very soul. Now, for the first time in this investigation, I want you to listen to a piece of evidence. This is not a special effect. This is the real, documented call of a barn owl. Now, imagine it. It's 200 years ago. You are sitting vigil in a small, quiet cottage. A loved one is fading in the next room. Your nerves are frayed. Your heart is heavy. and every shadow in the corner of your eye seems to move. In the dead of night, from the darkness just outside, that horrifying sound rips through the silence. A sound you have never heard before. A sound that does not belong to any animal you know. The next morning, your loved one has passed. It is only human to connect the two events. The sound didn't cause the death, but in your grief-stricken mind, it becomes forever linked to it. The sound becomes the omen. The owl becomes the banshee. So, there we have it, the trial of the Banshee, the case for the prosecution, a powerful, centuries-long collection of chilling, personal testimonies from every level of society. And the case for the defense, a compelling combination of misunderstood traditions and a case of mistaken identity with a nocturnal bird. So what's the verdict? The truth, as it often is likely far more interesting than a simple guilty or not guilty. A legend this powerful is rarely born from a single source. It's more like a perfect storm, a recipe for a haunting with three vital ingredients. First, you have the ancient idea of the Banshee, the folk memory of the goddesses we talked about. This was the cultural template, the story everyone already knew. Second, you have the real-life keening women, the human embodiment of the legend, a walking, wailing figure of grief that people could actually see. And third, you have the horrifying screech of the barn owl, the terrifying and unforgettable soundtrack that made the legend feel viscerally, undeniably real. For centuries, these three things, the myth, the woman, and the animal, all existed at the same time, weaving in and out of each other, feeding and amplifying the legend until they became one single, unshakable truth. It's a neat theory. It explains so much. But does it explain everything? Can a barn owl truly account for the stories of a beautiful, melodic song heard by multiple witnesses at once? Can a keening woman explain an apparition seen by a skeptic like Lady Anne Fanshawe in a locked room on the second floor? The rational explanation is compelling, but for some of the most famous stories, it doesn't quite fit. But perhaps, after all this, the most important question isn't whether the Banshee is real or not. Perhaps the real question is, why? Why has this specific story survived for thousands of years, across invasions, famines, and the dawn of the modern age? What does the enduring legend of a weeping woman tell us about the culture that created her? And more importantly, what does it tell us about ourselves? Why has this story survived when so many others have faded into the quiet dust of history? Because the Banshee is more than just a ghost story. She is the keeper of a nation's memory in a country that has endured centuries of invasion, occupation, and relentless attempts to erase its culture. The Banshee is a stubborn, supernatural symbol of everything that could not be conquered. She is the undying voice of the Gaelic world, a direct, living link to the High Kings and the Tuatha Dé Danann. You could outlaw the language, ban the music, and tear down the castles, but you could not silence the woman who cried in the night. Her lament was a declaration that the old ways, the old blood, and the old magic were still alive, still watching, and still powerful. She is the soul of the land itself, a raw, elemental force that is tied not just to the people, but to the very soil beneath their feet. Her cry is the lament of the earth, weeping for the loss of its most noble sons and daughters. Her loyalty is a reflection of the deep, almost mystical connection between the Irish people and their ancestral homeland, a bond that invaders could never hope to understand, let alone break. She is the ultimate proof that a nation is not just a piece of land on a map. It is a story, a memory, and a spirit. And Ireland's spirit has a voice. But the Banshee's power goes even deeper than history and politics. It touches on something far more universal, something every single one of us must eventually face: the chaos of loss. At her core, the Banshee is a masterful personification of grief itself. Think about it. Death is a terrifying, isolating, and often random event. It tears a hole in the fabric of a family. The Banshee provides a narrative for that chaos. She takes the formless, abstract pain of loss and gives it a face, a voice, and a solemn purpose. Her appearance transforms a random, tragic event into a significant, almost sacred moment. It's a sign that the universe has noticed, and in a strange way, her presence, while terrifying, is also a profound comfort. Her cry means that a death is so important that the Otherworld itself has taken a moment to weep. It means that the dying soul is not alone. A divine guardian from the oldest line of gods has come to witness their passing and to sing them on their way. In a culture like Ireland's, which has experienced so much loss through war, famine, and diaspora, the Banshee provides a powerful, almost defiant validation that this family's grief matters on a cosmic scale. She is the ultimate proof that you are part of something larger and older than yourself, and that even in death, you are not forgotten. So where does that leave her now, in our modern world of science and skepticism? In many ways, she has been reduced to a caricature. Her sacred, sorrowful song has been flattened and distorted into a monster's shriek for movies and video games, another disposable ghost in the machine. But the true spirit, the one woven from history and heartache, still lingers. Because the enduring lesson of the Banshee is this: some stories survive not because they are literally true, but because they are emotionally and culturally necessary. She represents an idea that we have almost forgotten in our noisy, disconnected world. The idea that our connection to our family, our ancestors, and our heritage is a real, tangible force. A force that not even death can break. And so, we return to the archive. The ink fades. The candle flickers. The file is nearly closed. We began this journey with a sound on the wind and found a story written into the very soul of a nation. We have traced her footsteps from the halls of ancient goddesses to the lonely castles of Gaelic lords, from the pages of dusty folklore to the chilling testimony of eyewitnesses. We have listened for her cry in the screech of an owl and in the sacred lament of the keening women. The Banshee is not a monster to be hunted or a puzzle to be solved. She is a reflection. She is the personification of a culture's profound relationship with grief, a testament to the belief that the bonds of family are stronger than death itself. Her cry is not a threat, but a final, heartbreaking honor. It is the sound of the Otherworld acknowledging a loss in our own. The modern world has tried to silence her, to dismiss her as simple superstition, but the legend endures. It endures in the quiet corners of the countryside and in the hearts of those scattered across the globe who still feel a connection to that ancient, magical land. Because the Banshee represents a truth that we have almost forgotten, that grief is not a weakness to be hidden, but a powerful, sacred force, and that in our final moments, we are not alone. The book closes, the room falls silent, but outside, on the wind, the sound of weeping waits. The stories have been told, the evidence weighed, and the archive grows quiet once more. The final file on the Banshee reveals a figure far more complex than a simple monster. She is an echo of forgotten goddesses, a symbol of a nation's defiance, and the ultimate personification of grief itself. The truth of her nature seems to lie somewhere in the misty space between a chilling supernatural reality and the profound psychological needs of a culture steeped in loss and loyalty. The story of the Banshee forces us to confront the power of belief and the lines where history ends and folklore becomes a living truth. What do you believe is the true source of her cry? Is she an ancient goddess keeping a promise, the tragic ghost of an ancestor, or a powerful myth created from tradition and fear? We want to hear your theory. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you believe these dark myths, strange histories, and forgotten legends are worth remembering, if you find these journeys into the shadows as fascinating as we do, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing to the Midnight Archives. Your support keeps the candle lit and allows us to keep opening these files. Thank you for watching.